They've asked if I could briefly speak about the Biomimicry Center that we launched about 2.5 years ago here at ASU. And many of you might know of biomimicry, but essentially it's innovation inspired by nature. About three and a half years ago, Janine Benyus, who wrote this book called Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature, got the an honorary PhD from ASU. And when she came here to receive the PhD, this is typically what happens. The honoree gets to spend time at ASU, but part of that also is an hour with Mike LaCroix. And so that means all kinds of new things get cooked up. And one of those things that got cooked up was the Biomimicry Center. So the idea was, why don't we start something at ASU? Because one of the things that Michael mentioned was, when he started the Biodesign Institute, one of the ideas that he had in mind was to do something around this notion of biomimicry, to do innovation inspired by nature. But that went more into the biomedical direction, so we launched the center 2.5 years ago, and we have seed funding from the Herberger Institute, W.P. Carey, Fulton School of Engineering, the School of Sustainability, the Provost's Office, and OCED. So it's we've got seed funding to get the program up and going, and we are constantly in the process of getting more grant funds. We have a Master of Science fully online in biomimicry, the first in the world. That's run through the center, run through the School of Life Sciences, but managed by the center, and several research projects ongoing as well. So is that enough of a kind of intro to, okay. But what I'm going to talk about today is some work that I've been doing in India. So my faculty position, like Dave mentioned, is in the design school. So I'm trained as an industrial designer. I design products and I teach how to design products. But I've always been interested in this notion of thinking of objects not just as expressions of form and function, and that's how typically designers tend to think of stuff they design, but also as expressions of everyday culture. And folks who study anthropology, folks who study material culture, understand that, recognize that, and study that. And so one of the things I started getting more interested in was the notion of the material itself. So how can we understand material, its properties, the agency of materials, what role they play in the design of products. And so what I'm going to talk about today is some work I've been doing in India with a group of copper craftsmen, and I'll talk about their processes of innovation, what they're working on, how long they've been around. But let's kind of take a quick trip to the city called Pune in Western India. Some of you might have been to Pune. And in the heart of the city is this region that's known as Tambat Ali. So the word Tamba in the local language Marathi means copper, and Tambat is a coppersmith. And Ali is lane. So Tambat Ali is a region in the heart of Pune that's been around for about 300 or 400 years. And this group of copper craftsmen, there was a time when there were 100 or more families working in this region. It's now dwindled down to about 30 to 35 families that make utensils using copper. I'll show some examples of their work, and I've got a few samples that I'll show later on as well. But it's a really lovely little location. It's sort of a series of really narrow alleyways, and I've been working closely with a few of the craftsmen, and where we are heading towards now is a region, it's a workshop of a gentleman that I've been working with very closely called Balchandra Karu. He's the 7th generation copper craftsman living working in that same space. So they have this on the ground floor, or the first floor, they have the workshop, and they live up on the second floor. So we're walking into his shop, and if I'll quickly plug in the sound for this. As this whole region, you can hear this hammering sound. It drives them crazy. I love the sound, but it's essentially metal hammers, steel anvils beating copper. And so we'll talk about this work in a bit. But we are now in Mr. Karu's workshop. He's also a collector of a significant number of copper and brass utensils. And this is Mr. Karu. So a couple of years ago, I got a grant from the Herberger Institute to bring him out to ASU, and we ran a little workshop. We taught some art and design students how to work with copper. We taught them the process of spinning, hammering. So it was really interesting for him to be able to come here and teach some of the practices that he's been involved with or his community has been involved for about 300 years to students at ASU. And there's a series of traditional items that they have been making in Tambat Ali for many years. One of the ones that's the most traditional ones is this thing over here. This is called, in the local language Marathi, it's called a Bomba, or it's essentially a water heater. And that product has been made continuously. And this is, you see one of the craftsmen making the Bomba. Essentially has a flue in the middle, which is very thick copper tube. You put coals inside, there's water around it, and it heats up the water. So with the arrival of electric water heaters, this has gone out of style. But there are still villages in India where this is extremely popular. So they churn these out on a regular basis. There may be about 50 or 60 of these that they make on a daily basis in Tamil Nadu. They're still sold in villages in India. But as you walk through this region of Tamil Nadu, you see they not only work with copper, they also work with brass. And each of these utensils that you see has a specific purpose. They have a specific name based upon the design and what location it comes from. So this copper, this brass, it's a utensil essentially for carrying water and has a very narrow neck and a mouth. This is also for carrying water. It's called a Hundy. But there are other utensils that are much larger. And those are essentially, you don't carry them, but they are essentially water storage utensils. So there's a series of these very traditional items that they have been making for many years. And what is really distinct about the work that these craftsmen do is the hammer tone texture. A lot of the other processes that are involved in making these utensils have been mechanized, or they use machines. But this, there isn't. I recently read someplace that there's a machine in Thailand that because this hammered work exists all over, hammered metal work exists all over the world. But there's a machine that was invented in Thailand that does have this sort of hammer tone thing. It's a repetitive action. But once you watch them more carefully, the unique things that each one of the craftsmen does. So now I've gotten to know them. I can tell by looking at the objects, I can tell who's made it, because I can recognize the pattern on the object. So I'll pass some of these objects around. They're incredibly beautiful, but the hammer tone, as you may guess, serves several purposes. One, it can hide any blemishes, so you won't see them. Second, it also gives, it's called case hardening. It actually makes the material stronger because of the hammer tone, and it picks up a luster. So some of the products they've created are lamps. So this is a you can put like a votive candle inside, and the way it shines off of these individual hammer tone textures is really remarkable. So there are several sort of aesthetic and functional reasons for this hammer tone work. What's really interesting though is this is the one part that is not been mechanized, so it's done by hand, and that drives up so it makes it unique, but also drives up the cost because it takes a lot longer to produce each of these utensils. So there are 5 or 6 different locations throughout Tamil Nadu where this work happens, and again, like I said, they make a series of different kinds of objects with copper, also brass, and then they work with aluminium as well. One of the things that's been happening is sort of the global trade in copper and its utilization in several other industries. So for example, copper is used in all kinds of wiring because it's a good conductor of electricity. It's used in construction, but also all of our electronic devices use significant amounts of copper, and that's driven up the price of copper. The other thing that's happened also is the advent of stainless steel. So as you may know, with copper, you can't really cook in copper because it oxidizes really quickly. You can't put any acidic material. So if you put lemon juice in this, it'll start getting a patina. It starts converting into copper sulfide. So you have to tin it. So people did used to use, so copper utensils are still used in cooking, but you have to tin them. You can't cook directly in copper. Stainless steel doesn't need that. So in most Indian households where people used to use copper and tin copper, they now use stainless steel. So that's, again, driven down the demand, driven up the cost. And we can see in this map here the increasing use of copper. So if you just look at use in China, the red bar shows the increase, and again, that's because of the use in electronic devices. Again, here too you can see copper mining production has gone up steadily over the past several years. But you may be familiar with this notion of endangered materials. That's right, just like endangered species, we have some materials that like peak oil, peak copper, etc. So copper is one of the materials that you see right here. So it's limited availability. By some I was trying to get some information on how much copper we have left, like virgin copper that can be mined. The copper industry says, oh, we have tons of it, no problem at all. But some other reports say that if we mine the rate we are mining now, by about 2040, we'll run out of all the copper. The good thing about copper, though, is like all metals, that they're unlike polymers, they can be recycled and they do not lose their properties. One of the problems with plastics is that the mechanical and physical properties of these plastics degrade, so recycling them over and over again becomes difficult, but that's not the case with copper. So about 31 to 35% of copper that is used today for all applications is recycled copper, and eventually we'll get to the stage that all copper will be recycled. And so here you can see how there's several metals that are considered endangered metals, and how much of these reserves we have of the materials. And this is a photograph from Bisbee. As Dave mentioned, there's a ton of copper mining that's been going on in Arizona for a very, very long time. And we all know the sort of impacts of open pit mining. It uses cyanide, it uses sulfuric acid, ammonium nitrate, fuel oil, explosives. So mining of copper has been problematic. So the thing that I've been kind of struggling with and thinking about is we have this group of craftsmen that have relied on making things out of copper for over 300 years. That's what they know, that's what they do, that's their craft. That's the community is referred to as the Tambad community, so they're referred to as a copper smithing community. Their name depends on this material, so does their livelihood. But as we have these sort of how do we allow the craft to endure while we're dealing with an endangered material? So it's a bit of a sort of dilemma, that a bit of an intractable problem as well. But I also wanted to kind of quickly run you through the process of making some of these things. So, for example, something like this, or even the utensil that's going around. It starts with what they call a circle. So it starts with a sheet of copper, which is then very often what they do initially is they go to a press and get this. These are large presses that convert that flat sheet into this this shape. It's heated up. So copper is an extremely soft material that hardens with as you work on it. So it's very often they work it, they heat it up again and soften it, they work it, they heat it up and again soften it. So this process goes on and on. They anneal it, it's cooled down, and then the next step is to cut it. So you can see he's kind of trimming the edge of the vessel, and then it goes on a lathe. And I'm not showing the entire process, but this is a process known as spinning, and it happens at room temperature because copper is a pretty soft material, so it doesn't need to be heated up too much, and doesn't need to go into large furnaces. But what's happening here is because copper is soft and it's pliable at room temperature, this process actually will convert that flat sheet of copper into the vessel that we'll see coming out in a few minutes. Again, it's heated up one more time, it goes back on the spinning lathe, it gets turned some more, and then it's cleaned. And what Indians have been using traditionally for a long time to clean copper is tamarind paste. So very often the tamarind that we use in cooking, the leftovers, which is the fibrous material from the tamarind bean, as well as some of the residual materials, those because of the acid clean copper really, really well. So that's traditionally what's used for cleaning, and that's what you see happening here. That's Nilesh who's doing the stuff, and then it's polished. So as it goes through the heating, it goes on the lathe, it gets cleaned by tamarind, it does pick up a bunch of patina, it oxidizes in bits and pieces. So this process cleans out the copper. So it's a sort of metal wheel on which he's polishing it, and you can see after it goes through that polishing process, it picks up this really, really beautiful luster that copper is best known for. So right now what Nilesh is doing is burnishing the inside. The minute he starts doing the outside, you'll see the shine on that copper appear. So he's doing the neck. So this object is like the one that I'm showing around. It has to be made with a collapsible die, because if you have a die, because the neck is smaller than the base, you have to have a die that breaks down into parts. And now you can see he's polishing the copper. You can see the shine that it picks up. And then the last stage in the process is the hammering, which is referred to as matarkam in Marathi. So they use it's a pretty long anvil. The hammers that they use are highly polished. on the surface that hits the metal. So two sections. One, the anvil and the hammer head itself are highly polished. I mean, they look like mirrors. That's the only way you can get such a high shine on the object itself. And then the process of hammering starts, and you can see over the past few months, I've been sitting down with them trying to learn how to do this, and it's insanely difficult of regular text. So all this that you see, I'm going to pass this around as well. The evenness is really stunning. It's all done entirely by hand. So they as you can tell, this is Shantaram. He's indexing it with his fingers. It's held. He has one toe inside, one toe on the outside, and there's no machine that indexes it, but he is able to get those really incredibly straight lines all the way across. So we'll just see him go around, and they keep changing the hammers depending upon the object. They keep changing the anvil depending upon the object. As he goes through, you can see how it goes through row by row, and eventually you get the object, and you can see that the hammer tone is pretty, it's not too clear here, but you can see it's pretty even all across. So we all know that when we think of sustainability, we think of these key things. We think of the environment, society, and economics. But one of the things I've been trying to separate out, in addition to those three, is preserving some of the cultural traditions and manufacturing practices and practices of innovation that these groups have been doing for many years. So the traditional objects that they make, like the water heater, they've been going on for a long time. But over the past few years, in order to find other markets for these products, because people in cities do not buy those water heaters, they do not buy those traditional materials, they've started to diversify and come up with a series of other products. They're working with local designers and trying to create new products. So the question is, how do we encourage, assist, promote, and help the cultural preservation of some of these practices when you have contentious materials being used, long-term practices. There also is changing. There are also changes in the economic structure. So one of the problems that has been going on with the way this work is paid is, traditionally, the copper craftsmen get the material from tradesmen who sell copper goods. They buy, so they pay the copper craftsman by weight. The problem with that is, if you have a really small, intricate object that takes a very long time to work, and it's really tiny, so it doesn't have too much weight, the copper craftsman ends up making extremely small amounts of money, because he is paid by weight. So what the craftsmen are now starting to do, and not all of them are doing this yet, but about half of the group is now demanding to be paid by the number of units they make rather than the weight of the goods. And it's a slow change, but it is changing it's making the community a bit more entrepreneurial in the way they go out and buy the raw material, because in the past the raw material was given to them by the tradesmen. They go out and buy the raw material, they cut it, they create the objects, and then they go out and sell it to the traders. So there's been a shift, and hopefully this shift will spread across the community, and all of them will start doing it, because they get much more value if they sell it by the number of units they make rather than the weight of the goods. And there are quite a few local designers who are working with the copper craftsmen. Rushmi, who you see here on the left, was in design school with me. She's been working with these copper craftsmen for about 15 years now. She works hand in hand with them. She creates some objects that are reworked traditional objects, but can be used, or can be bought, or might have some market in cities. But some that are really traditional forms, and some are entirely new forms. For example, this is a new product that she's been working on, which is like a tray, which is completely unusual. It's not something that has existed in the community. But by introducing these new products, there is a growing market for these goods. And here are just some of the photographs of some of the products that she's been working on. And this is a little box that she calls the Trinket Box, which is a combination of brass and copper. This is another example of a product that she's been working on as well.
Dave,
yep.
Have to get all of that? I mean,
what's that?
I like you. Can I? These are presents to Dave, right? Is that what gifts to Dave?
Let's talk later. So yeah, these are just examples of some of the products that she's been working on, and one of the things that people in India have believed for a long time is that copper has medicinal properties. And we do know that it changes the pH of the water that might be put in copper. So this is it's a kind of a redesign of a traditional flask, which what very often Indians do is you fill up this flask of copper with water at night, you let it sit on the bedside by your bed all night, and you drink that water in the morning. And we do know now that copper does have antimicrobial properties, so they're starting to use copper on counter surfaces in hospitals, on railings, etc., because certain kinds of microbes, certain kinds of bacteria, actually, when they come in contact with copper ions, it ruptures their skin. So it does have some properties, where it does have some antibacterial, antimicrobial properties. So some of the things that I'm continuing to work with the community. In terms of my research, I've been doing observations, I've been interviewing the copper craftsmen. One of the things that, and this is happening across craft communities all over the world, is that the hammer work is done mostly by men. There are certain other aspects of the job that women are participating in as well. But most of the sons and daughters of the copper craftsmen, they're choosing to go into, they're getting formal education, they're choosing other professions, and so the craftsmen that I've been interviewing kind of bring up this idea that maybe in 20 or 30 years, so the youngest copper craftsman I've spoken to in this region right now is about, Ganesh is about 35 years old, and so they fear that in about 30-40 years this craft may completely disappear from this part of India, at least the way it exists right now. One change that is happening though is some of the sons of these craftsmen, they are interested in being entrepreneurs and setting up factories where this work can happen, but they're not interested in doing the work themselves. So this so far, or currently the work has been done primarily by the community. So it's called the Twashta Kasar Samaj. That's the name of the community. That community has been doing the work, but they are now willing, and some of them are actually doing it, reaching out outside that community and training people who are not from that community to take on this work. So we might see a shift in how the entrepreneurship changes, and so these sons and daughters might work more as factory owners rather than the craftsmen themselves. So right now the craftsmen themselves are factory owners as well, but that's one of the shifts that could happen. So some of the constraints that we are facing and the community is facing right now is the availability of copper. If we only have 30-40 years of copper left, does that mean they shift material? Do they start working with other materials that are more available? Do they start working with recycled materials? So the future of the community depends upon the material availability, but also how copper will go up in price, how much, and whether it becomes devastating, whether there will be more entrants into the workforce to do the copper work. That depends upon that, and then how this trading and entrepreneurship stuff changes. So if the entire community is able to get paid based upon the number of units they make rather than the weight, I think there are better chances for them to continue doing the work and getting paid for the labor and surviving. And finally, how do they reshape their craft, their practice of innovation? How do they work with designers? There's quite a few in the region of Pune who are working with the craftsmen. Everything from creating stuff for architectural applications to products to jewelry. So there's quite a few potential applications for the craft, and I think these four factors will sort of, in a sense, determine how this work moves forward.